Good morning, viewers and listeners. Welcome to the Level Set. Of course, my voice is not the familiar opening voice. I'm Larry Fields. We are awaiting our fearless leader, our fearless host, Reddit Hudson, and upon his arrival, we certainly will narrow the control. But this morning, I am pleased to have here, we might as well call this the Level Set Morning Show at this point, the illustrious Mike Jones and the Dr. Charles Alexander from Chicago, Illinois. And we're going to hop right in. Another week, we had another mass shooting. Highland Park, Illinois, right outside of Chicago. We had a mass shooting. And what is striking about this shooting is that you have a number of the major pundits blaming everyone except the shooter for the condition that has birthed this credence that meticulously dressed in women's garb to get away and meticulously planned this thing out. And you want to blame a society in which privilege just doesn't have the same privileges that it had in the past. And folks literally have to get out and work like the rest of us. But it's society's fault. So I'm going to let you all weigh in on these mass shootings and the environment that is birthing these credence.
Well, Charles, take it away.
Yeah. So I'm not really adverse to the conversation about the impact of society in this circumstance, because I think what it speaks to is, again, this detachment from, there's a detachment from what is humane, in preference for, some mythological statement or position of freedom, where, to be free in America means to have a gun in defense of tyranny, right? And so now, since everybody needs that, anybody can get it. So it doesn't matter how stable, unstable, or whatever, you're entitled to that, assuming that you're a citizen, right? Now, who are the citizens in the United States? White folks, right? So all of that is really about them. None of that is about us. And so the whole conversation about freedom and who's entitled to it and who has to have what they need in order to be who they are, that's all about them. It's not about us. And so here you have an individual who, once again, after the fact, we have all of these red flags that these same folks say, we can't talk about red flags because that shouldn't limit your freedoms, right? So police done been to this guy's house. He done been to the rest of his family's house because he been threatening all his family. And I think he was living with his uncle because he said he was gonna kill his family. And so, he collect knives, he collects guns, all kind of stuff. Evidently, Highland Park has a sizable Jewish community, and then I think it butts up to an adjacent community that has a sizable Latino population. But I was listening to an interview on the story that featured someone from the Anti-Defamation League, and it's very interesting because the host of the show, which was a sister, by the way, kept trying to push for this anti-Semitism angle, and the guy from the Anti-Defamation League was very clear. He's like, no, we've poured through everything, all his social media posts, There's nothing that would lead us to believe that, that this is any kind of anti-Semitic, action or activity or what have you. This does not appear to be his MO. Now, what he didn't say is that the guy's a blatant racist otherwise. That he didn't say. And so when people then start to talk about what's in his social media, and they start to talk about the students that he's gone to school with historically, they just say how blatantly racist this guy was. And but that, you know, that just happens not to be a part of the conversation. Now, his victims are pretty much, you know, they white folks and a couple of Latino folks. You know, so I imagine that X number of his you know, his shots were just purely random. But the fact being is that that's who this guy is. The police, he was known to the police. The police are on record as saying that there was no actionable items in the past. Yet we have what, 6 or 7 dead, and you know, many wounded, and others mentally and emotionally traumatized because nobody wanted to act because nobody wants to violate his personal freedom.
Yeah, Larry, I'm ducking behind Charles's drift on that, and my take is that the pundits who are blaming the society are, I think, fundamentally correct for the reasons. Okay, it's not like it's society's fault, but this kind of emotional mental breakdowns, meltdowns, are a function, and Charles can speak to this better than I can, really are a function of when people's reality starts to break down and they start to lose touch with what has been their frames of references. And those frames of references are no longer valid, and they no longer support who they are in the physical space as they perceive it. And they have, it's a cognitive dissonance, and they respond to that, and they respond in different kinds of ways across the board, depending upon who they are. And if you think about it, by and large, all of these are young guys between 18 and 25, which means they're not even fully formed adults. So they don't even have a core character or personality to fall back on to say, how do I figure this out? Because they haven't even got to the point where they had figured it out the first time. So it literally, think of yourself as being 10 years old and realize it ain't no Santa Claus, okay? And you just spent all your Christmases have been about Santa Claus. But the reason you can survive the myth of Santa Claus is because by then you become connected to mama, daddy, or family, and they buy you Christmas stuff. So you don't lose Christmas, you just give up Santa Claus. But what would you do if you found out at 10, it ain't no Santa Claus, and because it ain't no Santa Claus, it ain't gonna be no Christmas either. So now you're dealing with a whole bunch of other stuff. So I don't think it's an excuse, but for me, it goes back to, we need to be more analytical and objective about our circumstances. Like the one thing you learn as you're growing up in the neighborhood is when you start to go outside the neighborhood, you always have to be aware of your space. What are the spaces I'm in? Who's in the spaces? What's going on here? And we are as naive and ignorant now about white America as white America has always been naive and ignorant about them. So we say the same stupid stuff now that white folks say about what's going on. And so the reality is Sean Hannity or the other boy, crazy boy, Tucker Carlson, they're trying to make an excuse, but they really shine the light on what is at the root of the problem. And that is this breakdown in what has been the cultural norms of what it meant to be white in America. And if you notice, who you're losing and who is responding to this ain't the poorest white folks, because they never had nothing coming anyway. Okay, they scuffling to make it. They are us without the melanin. Okay, so but these, if you think about all these shooters, come from middle class or aspiring middle class background who would have thought their lives would have been different. They're listening to their parents talk about how this is unraveling for them, and they looking at it through the lens of race as opposed to adding a lens. You know, like when you go to the eye doctor and they give you the eye exam and they put the different lenses on, say, how is this? And you talk about, yeah, this is clear. They're missing the lens of neoliberal capitalism, because that is for me, the ultimate driver of this. And racism has always been the handmaiden of capitalism, not the cause of capitalism. Okay, that racism is a rationalization for a lot of the stratification, the social and economic stratification that capitalism creates. And you got to rationalize it some way. So you rationalize, so you pick a group of people that are different. All societies got to have an other. Whoever the other is, you then rationalize why the other ought to be the other. And for us, it's, we Black, this is America, so it becomes race. But if we had to say it's all left-hand people, they'd have had a theory of the other that justified left-hand people being over here, and all the right-handed people or the blue-eyed people are cool. So I think when we talk about it, we are learn again to talk about America the way you get. I know I heard talk about it as a kid growing up, and you guys probably did too. You would hear older Black folks talk about them, not us. Okay, that was us, and there was them, and we had a better understanding of who we are and who they are when we talked about it in terms of us and them. We've gotten confused now that we talk about America as us, and it sends you, it'd be like you in court, Larry, as a lawyer. You got facts and you got law, but you got the wrong theory of the case, and you're getting your ass kicked every day because you arguing the wrong point. Not that you got the wrong facts, not that you got the wrong law, but your interpretation of what you ought to be doing with that is so off. It causes you say, I'm right, I'm losing the case. It's because you're arguing the wrong theory. And that, I think, is our confusion in this moment. And the real question is, we talked about this before the show started. The real question is, I'll modify what I said last week or a couple of weeks ago. The real question is not, are we looking at the beginning of a collapse of a society, but depending on how ultimately white folks respond to this moment, we could be witnessing the birth pangs of a new America trying to be born. I don't have a clue which one it is, because death at the end and birth at the beginning and life at the beginning kind of look the same. Going out, coming in and going out is traumatic for whoever's dying, and babies don't talk about it, but being born got to be a hell of an experience. That's why nobody remembers it once they get here. So and that's what we could be going through now. Okay, and I don't have a clue which one, but I think that's a way to think about it, a way to look at it.
Well, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, and you are 100% correct. We don't know if it's the beginning or the end, and Dr. Alexander, agree with you as well. Joining us is Reddit Hudson. one of our resident experts, but we're talking about the mass shooting in Highland Park. But we can dovetail that and rely on some of our built-in genius, juxtaposing the handling of the American franchise shooter versus Jayland Walker in Akron, Ohio. I'd like to have you chime in on those issues, if you would, Mr. Hudson.
Oh, yeah. Well, good morning, brothers, and good to rejoin you here on the Level Set. I've been thinking about that, Larry, as has many people around the country, the difference between Jayland Walker's outcome at Akron, Ohio, where he as an individual, unarmed, was pulled over by the police for a basic traffic stop relative to the tags on his car, I believe, or something like that. This is a young man with no criminal history, doing his job. I believe he was working, what's the food delivery service called?
Grubhub or DoorDash.
Yeah, DoorDash, something like that. Takes off for whatever reason, man. And a lot of times now we understand that people are just afraid. Black men in particular can become fearful for their lives when confronted by police in any circumstances. He leaves. And what we see after that on video footage looks like an execution. Once he exits the car, there's a foot pursuit. The officers in pursuit of this man claim to have tried to taser him, which means that they didn't perceive him as a threat or a deadly threat at the time. And then at the last moments of his life, they shoot him 60 times. I want to see the autopsy because I am certain that some of those bullets went into his back, probably the initial shots. They claim that he turned in a threatening manner, but still, no firearm on him. And they fired over 80, they recovered 90 shots. They fired at him 90 times, hit him 60 times. Versus, and that was with the information that they had, versus this little clown in Highland, who they know at some point possessed an automatic weapon, fired 87 times into a crowd, killing 7, injuring dozens, and who again, after a mass murder, an act of pure violence and evil, is calmly taken into custody unharmed. It is the quintessential distinction in the two-tiered justice system that we have in this country, one for Black, one for white. And, it's more the same. Nobody is surprised. None of us are surprised by this, but we're all committed to doing the work we have to do to ensure that going forward, whatever America is emerging, the one we live in is one where equity and justice can be prevalent. Now, that's going to be a challenge, man, because of what we see around the country set up in all of these states in rapid succession, especially the Republican-dominated legislatures, where now they'll control elections, outcomes, policy, law. That is going to become a challenge. But it's a challenge we have to rise to meet. And however this situation evolves, man, we have to remain committed to our full safety and prosperity. I don't think anybody else can go to bat for us. No party, really. No individual, really. This has to be a collective team move to ensure that our children's world is not the one that they're trying to drag us back to that existed 100 years ago.
We have to understand that this fight is never going to stop. The fight for resources does not stop. We tend to believe that we've arrived, but after the championship, you take 2 weeks off and you get right back at it. Which leads us gratitude.
Can I throw one more thing in there, Larry?
Go right ahead.
Yeah, the interesting development too, and this it's all interrelated, man. A lot of these things that we see are the results of policy. The reason that kids are so easily ready to get a AR is policy. Policies come from legislatures. That's one branch of our government. There are other aspects, the judicial, executive. Look at what's happening in Georgia. And this is an interesting turn in the conversation, I know. But when you look at the sister down there, who has just subpoenaed Lindsey Graham and Rudy Giuliani, told them to get their ass down to Fulton County. We got some questions for you. Here's Lindsey Graham trying to resist the subpoena. But if law is the law and rules are rules, if there's to be a rule of law in the country, that's the pressure that can be put on those remaining folks on the other team, the ones who could hold their cousins responsible. That's the pressure that's put on them right now. Is the rule of law or not? Or we gonna have these guys under the subpoena? If so, get them down there to talk about the open crimes they committed, man. You all are the attorneys. You know that the evidence is already there for Lindsey's interference in a federal election, which is a federal crime. Come down there, out of his own damn state to run interference for Donald Trump. Then you see what's happening with the January 6th committee. What's the Department of Justice able to do, if anything, to at least slow the roll of the people who are trying to move us towards an authoritarian government? Ron DeSantis is sitting on the bench waiting to get in the game and do things even worse than what we saw the last clown do. So this judicial piece, combined with the public's response to some of the things that we've seen, is going to be very important to see how that goes in the coming days and weeks.
And that segues perfectly into an article that Dr. Alexander shared with us this week. I'm going to have Dr. Alexander go into that because, when you talk about the legislative arm and, essentially representation in Atlanta and other areas that need to represent our communities. And, there are individuals inside our camp that are, for lack of a better word, selling us out for 20 pieces of silver. Dr. Alexander, can you go ahead and expound on the article you sent and the state of affairs that we find ourselves in?
So the article centers around, so I sent out a few articles. One was from The Intercept, and the article is about Bakari Sellers, brother from South Carolina. He was a state rep in South Carolina. He's always said to be civil rights, legacy and da-da-da-da-da. His father's Cleveland Sellers. I think he was in SNCC back in the day. And anyway, this brother is fronting he's the front man for a new political PAC, the Urban Empowerment Action PAC, which per the PAC is dedicated to empowering urban communities to narrow the wealth gap between Black and white Americans. And I'll read the rest. UEA PAC believes that creating real economic opportunities for African Americans requires the adoption of smart public policies rooted in empowerment and the reversal of harmful public policies and the barriers to opportunities that perpetuate in education, public safety, workforce development, entrepreneurship, housing, and health. UEA PAC unites individuals and brings diverse communities together to support candidates committed to advancing policies that will improve the lives of African Americans. Now, all that sounds great, except for the two entities that are primarily, funding and standing this PAC up are this right-leaning hedge fund dude who right now is the sole financial contributor, and the American Israel Political Action Committee, right? And so underneath this veneer of urban empowerment is a plan to run right-leaning Black candidates that are pro-Israel against more progressive candidates. And right now they are targeting Rashida Tlaib in Detroit, because she is the person that is currently sitting in the seat that was formerly held by Conyers, and they're running against her under the guise and auspices that seat should be held by a Black person. kind of regardless of whatever her current track record is. They've done the same in Ohio. I forget the exact race, but they ran some obscure person against the progressive candidate there. And the chances are that they are going to get involved in this race in St. Louis and support the candidate that's currently opposing Cori Bush, because these folks don't want these folks, and I mean these right-leaning, they're not centrist, they're right-leaning, conservative, Democrat, Black folks, and the pro-Israeli lobby don't want the progressive folks that represent the people in space. And so that's kind of what we're looking at right now. And that's all a part, to your point, Red, they're very clear that this has to do with policy, right? But we will miss that.
Mm.
We will see Bakari Sellers,
Mm-hmm.
and we will be like, we rolling with him. He's smart, and he went to Larry Field School, and so we can follow him. He's gonna be the next Dr. King. We'll follow that.
He's got a
God lead
children's
us straight to
book.
hell.
He just represented a bunch of individuals. He just had a almost $100 million settlement. So the fact that he's doing this, I mean, it's just it's a conditioning and a curation that is unmatched, and it's troubling. Mike, weigh in on this. Help us understand.
I was listening to what Charles was saying, and again, before the show, we kind of talked about the Roberts Bush campaign, but Baraki Sellers, and I'm gonna say it about all of these younger brothers and some sisters, but I'm gonna deal with this. I'm gonna be sexist for a moment and just deal with these younger brothers. That it's consistent with this entrepreneurial, what I call the entrepreneurial Black politician, that he's bright, he's smart, he's a Morehouse graduate, and he ain't thought about much else other than himself his entire life. Because you can tell by the way people leave. So even the work that you say you're doing is really about how you personally advance yourself, as opposed to you were putting in the work. Once upon a time, you were putting in the work, and because you were putting in the work, you got advanced. Now, superficially, they both look like the same thing, but it's different energy associated with that. I would suggest that when you hear Black upper middle class professionals talk about wealth creation and entrepreneurship, they ain't talking about public policy for average Black folks. They talking about public policy for themselves. You could even argue at this point, or make this point and argue it with some logic and fact, that the civil rights movement was really a mass Black movement for the benefit of upper middle class Black folks, because at the end of the day, who benefited from civil rights and the liberalization of society were upper middle class Black folks who were educated and held out of a certain level of opportunity. We didn't do anything to address the structural issues that mitigate against and affect average working class Black people. You haven't heard, and I think it's because we now produce Black leadership that comes from an upper middle class Black social strata, as opposed to if his daddy was in SNCC, I bet you he was one of the first people in his family to go to college, and the brothers got their politics coming out of the movement, and they went to a certain place. His daddy gets to be successful, and now his son, you don't need a scholarship for a while. I wrote the check, and you coming into the world in a whole different place. So I think we need the ability to step back, and another catchphrase I've created for myself, we need to understand the fallacy of the politics of melanin. Just cause somebody looks like you don't mean they are you. And I would argue that we've seen this kind of lack of structural integrity, this breakdown throughout our entire community over the last 30, 40 years. It's what I've disparagingly called this the deseg generation. I mean, Black folks ain't got integrated into America, but America did get desegregated. And it's what happens when you send your best, when you're in a colonial situation, and you send your best and brightest in mass, not one at a time, but in mass to the master schools. Okay, when they left India going to Oxford or nowhere, they all come back worthless to you. Now that don't mean that they don't have value, and that don't mean that they don't do some good things, but fundamentally, we were better off when white folks were overt racist and colonialist settler mentality, because we could see who they were. When they moved to neo-colonialism, it looks like they done backed off, and they just basically, to use a street frame reference, they just ran a different game. So that rather than rob you, they con you. And what they do is they send folks, like you do in any kind. I need your confidence. I'm gonna send. I used to roll into town myself. Now I'm gonna send somebody. And so now the people I'm sending, they think like me. They ain't there for you. Although they look like they're there for you, they sound like they're there for you. You recognize them from the park and the picnic, but they ain't you. Okay. Right. And we don't. And when we grew up a different kind of way, we could discern which one of us was us and which one of us wasn't. And we knew how to isolate this. And we used to teach kids how to look at that. Okay, that's so-and-so, that's that, that's this. Okay, we don't do none of that no more. So we got this, we are as lost as the Hebrews who left Egypt, okay? So we've been wandering around in the wilderness for, if you take the Civil Rights Act of 64, 65, and this is 2022, we have been wandering around in the wilderness for the last 40, 50 years. And we got a lot of false idols. I know. So if you went up to the mountain to commune and come back with the commandments, when you get back, you're gonna be like Moses, man, what y'all been doing while I was gone, man? You got gold calf. I mean, literally every reason we left Egypt, okay? Now, if I was a preacher, that's the way I would tell it, okay? Since you're talking to church folks, every reason we left Egypt, y'all done gave away. Okay, that's why we ain't in the promised land. Can't nobody take us nowhere when y'all like this. Okay, and that's a point.
And I don't think you could say it any better if you had a license, Mike Jones, to preach.
Larry, what Mike just said.
Hold on, Reddit. But those Hebrews you talk about as us and them as you. But Reddit, I'm coming right to you though. With respect to the articles that were sent, one of the reasons for this curation that this pact is establishing was a road in support of Israel by Black folks. Black folks are, trying to awaken and see the Zionist movement for what it is. I just want to get some of your thoughts, Reddit, on everything that's been stated in that regard, and how that, I like the way Dr. Alexander infuse this specific tactic into what we're dealing with here in the Cori Bush Roberts race in St. Louis.
Sure, and to Dr. Alexander's point, the policy, the moves that people are making, our lack of awareness of it is going to be the avenue on which it finds its success. I want to say this before I answer your questions, Larry. That's why I'm so deeply appreciative of you brothers, man. I was a little late getting to the show this morning, I know, but the critical piece about us and this show is what Dr. Alexander highlighted off the top. Bakari Sellers has multiple media platforms, man. I mean, when I was a little bit more regular on the national media circuit, he was on every day, right? On CNN, and I'm sure he's got other multiple platforms. He still appears very regularly in large national media spaces. So he has access to move information. And to Dr. Alexander's point, if you're moving information, everybody knows when you're funded by somebody, they absolutely have a hand in shaping the information that you move and the agenda that you execute. There's no escaping that. So if that's who he is fronting for, you can see clearly what the danger is in his work. At a time,
connect the dots, Reddit. Great, go ahead. Do it.
At a time when it's been identified that what this Supreme Court and this right-leaning effort is trying to do, they're not after any single policy. They want to eradicate the 20th century. They want that shit gone. Everything that happened in those last 100 years, including your civil rights movement, any other advance and advantage that you nominally gained. We know that in reality, none of that really came fully to pass, but anything that you even nominally gained, we want to codify its breakdown. And for him to be an operative in one of the most critical groups, Black people, nationally, if you're going to hold anything, you have to have us. For him to be an operative that could potentially swing any percentage, because any percentage hurts. Anything, you don't have to get the whole team with us, right? You have to shave off a certain amount to ensure victory for the other side.
Less than 10%.
It's a devastating revelation. I would love to hear what the hell is his thinking is, his basis is, and disregarding the fact that we know money is always a bottom line answer. I would like to hear him articulate what he sees in that word going forward to Israel. And the changing posture.
Unmute yourself, Dr. Alexander.
I'll tell you what he says. This joint effort builds on the strong relationship between African American and Jewish leaders to uplift all communities. Instead of allowing our communities to be divided, history teaches us that when Black and Jewish communities stand together to fight for our common ideals, we create positive change in society. Our hope is for our electoral engagement to bear fruit through representatives who fiercely fight on behalf of those who need socioeconomic empowerment.
Right. Now here, what I'll say.
Don't you remember when the Black in the Israel and the pro-Israel lobby? Don't you remember when that created Black wealth and education? You remember that?
Right.
It was only rivaled by Marion Barry.
Oh my goodness.
Right. And here's what I'll say, Larry, because the other part of the question that you asked me was relative to changing attitudes, postures in the Black community as it relates to Israel. And what I'll say is, I don't know any anti-Semites, right? I don't. You've worked with any number of people.
First of all, let's.
But let me finish my answer. Let me
what
finish.
That is. I mean, it has been misapplied and misused so much.
Right.
I mean,
but let me finish.
So I mean, we got to address that.
But what there is an increasingly aware community, not just in the Black community, but internationally, of how the state, I'm not talking about Jews, I'm talking about the state, the government, right? There's a distinction that could be made, operates on a national stage, but especially and specifically as it relates to Palestine. and the borders and the laws and the human rights violations ongoing, to the point where no conscious person, no humane person, no sane person can ignore the fact that they, in many instances, appear to have operated outside of international law and without real consequence. And the call for those issues to be addressed does not equate to anti-Semitism. It equates to consistency for people who call for everyone's borders and rights and humanity to be recognized. It equates to consistently calling for that regardless of who is operating in that space. So I understand what Dr. Alexander has laid out too. There is some history there, but we got to go with what's happening in 2022.
And that's where we're vulnerable, because somewhere between, that sparkling and glimmering Bakari Sellers and, and Pastor Plate. Pastor Plate is going to tell you that this is the fulfillment of prophecy. Pastor Plate is going to tell you that this is the Lord's work, because Israel is entitled to Palestine, right? And to your point, Reddit, Pastor Plate is going to confuse opposition of the Zionist movement with anti-Semitism, and is going to do so intentionally. And so the other stated cause of this move, and this is the statement by Bakari Sellers, is that they're going after, so he said two things. He was like, they're going after the sister in Detroit, allegedly because that should be a black seat. But the other part of it is that she has been identified by the American Israeli Political Action Committee as the major threat, because she's one of the most outspoken persons about Israeli aggression in Palestine. And why might she be that? Because she's Palestinian. So this is not happenstance. This is who she is. She's Palestinian.
We need to get her on the show, man.
And
we need to get her on the show.
And so they identified the other folks who are most verbal in this space. One of them, of course, is Ocasio, right? And then we know another is Cori Bush. These are the people who are identified by the UEA PAC and APAC, or whatever you call it, the American Israeli Political Action Committee. And so it has everything to do with that. And we will be vulnerable because we will think this somehow got something to do with some, coming of some biblical verse. We will be vulnerable to that. And he's shiny. He's a Morehouse man. And to your point, he got all his platforms that he's on. He's on TV. He cleans up nice. He got to be right. And he talking about Black empowerment, because that's what we need, right? We need this Black empowerment. And so we will miss all. We're going to be fooled by what glitters. We will think that it is gold.
It is a shiny object syndrome, and we obviously have to have a sponsor, because we're minorities, right? We have to have a sponsor to help us achieve any sort of wealth acumen. But it underscores the Dr. Alexander, I had the privilege of going to several Bible classes with your father, and one of his most quoted scriptures was, "My people perish for a lack of knowledge." And that's what this is. Because if you had any knowledge about who the promise was made to by Abraham, the descendants of Abraham, the descendants of Shem, and the descendants of Jacob, you would know that this is a criminal enterprise that's operating in the Gaza Strip. And every time, and you would also know how big enablers the rest of the world is, because we don't get any news about that unless there's the most outlandish of things that happen. And I mentioned it on this show once before, but about a month ago, the Israeli soldiers killed a reporter that had press vest on. Not only did they kill her, they went to the funeral and assaulted individuals that were trying to mourn.
Yes.
And not a word was done. Was said about that. So I mean, this notion, and
wasn't that an American journalist, Larry?
It was. It was. I mean, they're now saying she had some traces in America, but she was not American. But she was not telling the story. I mean, you can't even. I mean, she was not telling the story the way the Israelis wanted. They won't even allow the Palestinians to fly their own flag now. They will kill you. They catch you trying to fly your own flag. So it's no accident that we have this buddying up and curation of individuals at the highest level that they can identify. They being individuals that are enemies to our community, for their own good. And CRT at the same time is catching foes. So because if I can continue to keep you dumb, I can continue to control you. Mike, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, all of this revolves around identity, because what was Kierkegaard's comment? Who am I? How did I get here? What's this thing called the world? Why wasn't I consulted? Where's the director I want to talk to? Once you decide who you are relative to the universe, that then guides you on whatever journey you're on. If I can, your favorite Omega is Carter G. Woodson, Larry. And what does he say? If you can control how a man thinks, you don't have to physically restrain him. I mean, you fundamentally have control of him. So most Black people could not tell you that Zionism is an ideology, or as an idea, didn't exist before the 1880s, 1870s. And it was really a result of and a response to the anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish nature of French culture at the end of the 19th century. And a political idea rose for that said, what Jews got to do is get out of Europe, and we need a homeland. Okay. Now that idea was a minority idea for most of the 20th century. And but it was there, but it's not an old idea in a historical standpoint. As a function of World War II and a whole bunch of other stuff. And basically Truman supported the creation of the state of Israel because he was running for re-election in 1948. And he did it against the Vice Secretary of State, Marshall, but it swung New York and a couple more states, and Dewey beats Truman. Truman beats Dewey in 1948. So the reality is we have no real awareness of any of this historical thing and this historical information. And I would freeze the creation of the state of Israel out there for a minute. But let's just assume that Black folks, and it's a reasonable proposition, they say, you know what, we need to get out of America. It's Marcus Garvey. And we're going back to Africa. Where'd you come from in Africa? I don't know, but we think it's right here. And we go land there and we go create a country. Now, the fact that there are people who have lived on the continent for the last 500 years, they've been in this space, they don't know who we are. They are aware of us, but they say, what is the rationale for you coming here and taking the place that I occupy and turning it into the place that you want to occupy. And anybody would be in resistance to that. Okay, we would have no more moral justification to colonize parts of West Africa based on the historical fact that this is where the descendants of the African diaspora left. Now, we left 400 years ago, more or less. The Roman Empire dispersed the Semitic population, the Semitic Jewish population from the Middle East about 2,000 years ago. Okay. And so literally, if you say this used to be yours, but bro, you ain't been here in 2,000 years, man. And we didn't put you out. The Romans did that. And if you decide, it's almost like you could argue that the bill for the Holocaust to make whole the Jewish population of Europe, the bill wasn't sent to the Germans, it was sent to the Palestinians, or the people who were living in the Middle East. Okay, because if you say even you want to, since you've been in Europe for the last 2,000 years, we need to be carving up some of Europe. But it is the danger, and I'll put it like this: the whole point of the Enlightenment was based on reason and science, and up until that time, the world had, no matter what society you're in, it was hierarchical. And it was based on revelation and religion. And this is what happened. This is what you get when you use things that you can't prove, and nobody can prove metaphysical ideas. I mean, they're theories, they're ideas. When you use that to justify real-time things without any other say, this is the reason for this. And it's what Charles say. So you take a group of, and I'm gonna say, and I mean ignorant and not stupid, people who are ignorant, and you give them a theory of something that rationalizes their reality and their behavior. And you can damn near justify anything after that. If I can get you to believe the predicate, everything I argue from the predicate becomes something you'll accept. And we don't teach people to challenge the predicate.
Right. Mike, that's the premise in the book that you had advised us to read some time back. I believe Sapiens runs on some of those same themes, man, in terms of what folks believe is what they act on. Right. But again, let me just reiterate this for the viewers and listeners who are tuning in. I deeply respect and appreciate all of you brothers, man. And the reason this show is so important is because of the information that is presented. I don't know that I've heard, Dr. Alexander, that information presented in an analytical way for us to be able to process it and respond to it and offer up some clarity for folks that otherwise just won't know. We have to continue in our work, man, because with efforts like that underway, it becomes more and more important that we be effective at what we do.
And again, I mean, we have to ask ourselves, how can this urban empowerment political pact be in our best interest and be stood up by, hedge fund guru Daniel Loeb and the American Israeli Political Action Committee? How can those two entities be in the best interest of Black folks? It just does not make sense.
Yeah. And we'll reach out to some of these parties for sure. I think we should reach out to Representative Tlaib, just get her on, and Cori Bush. I know we could reach out to get her on and get maybe their response to these efforts that are ongoing to try to undermine their leadership and their representation of our community. Just to get their response to it, I believe they deserve a space in which to address those issues. You know that in many respects, the mainstream is not going to give them a balanced opportunity to challenge some of the people who are coming at them. So I think we should put that on our agenda. Oh yeah, it looks like we're getting close to.
No, we're fine. We're not getting close. That's just an update.
Yeah.
We are fine.
I mean, relatively speaking, closer than we were at the start.
Always.
To the
We're
end of the
closer
show.
to the end. We're closer to the
Yeah.
end every minute.
And
Yeah.
I want to add something again to the policy discussion and the continual rollback. So Roe is another example of how we are missing the point. The fundamental issue in Roe is that the decision to abort falls under the 14th Amendment. It's an issue of personal privacy. That's a decision that you make just like any other decision. And so when they attack, and so in the leaked document, I think one of the things that dude said was that that privacy isn't an issue in this piece. But that was fundamental to the initial ruling, is that this is a private decision. This is not a public decision. This is within a woman's right to make this decision because she knows what's right for her. And again, whether she does or not, the 14th Amendment gives her that right. And so in this, we have all these folks, clearly, the evangelicals and the more hostile of the right anyway, particularly this lady in Southern Illinois who thank President Trump for saving white life.
Yeah,
they've made this thing about they've made this too a biblical piece, right? And that this child has this right to life, even if it's not a viable life to start with, which was not a part of the original ruling. The ruling is about, due process and privacy accorded to you under the 14th Amendment. And so when you roll this back, all you're doing is setting up for all of the other things that, all of the other rights and privileges thereunto that are now, clearly and squarely in the crosshairs, because we're clapping about, we're clapping about the misinformation that we got about Planned Parenthood.
Charles, I want to jump into that because the essence of the Enlightenment and what Jefferson was referring to when he said we hold these truths to be self-evident, everybody's created life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. The foundational idea that is personal autonomy, your right to your life as a human being, that nobody, no authority, no secular, no religious authority has authority over your personhood. Period. In the conversation is non-debate. The whole Enlightenment is a rejection of theocratic rationale for society. So really, and it's why I tell, and Riddick mentioned Sabians, but it's why I would tell Black folks why you got to read Old Dead White Men, because every argument you're having is a product of arguments or discussions or constructs, intellectual constructs that were created 300-400 years ago. that people are still operating in, and they don't even think about the predicates anymore. So what people like Clarence Thomas, they are no different than the Taliban, the Muslim group. They want a God inspired, and they are the interlocutors with God. And you as an individual no longer have the right to your personhood, because they have this theocratic theory of society and government that says you have to be under this doctrine in order for this thing to work. And if people can choose how they want to interpret their humanity and personhood, then and I don't care if you're Roman Catholic, a Mullah someplace, all of that breaks down once you establish the notion of the autonomy of the individual. Now, from there, you got to have ethics and morality. I mean, and it don't mean what stupid white folks think it means. I'm free to do whatever I want to do. No, it now means the burden and responsibility on living an ethical and moral life is now on you. Okay, that you now are required, because you have agency to figure out what that means in community with all the other people who are. That's the whole theory of the social contract. I mean, Hobbes, Rousseau, Locke, they, in order to figure it out, they had to create an assumption about what would it look like before. Why would people form a social contract? But it all comes down to everybody has personal agency, but we're social animals, and we all have to figure out how to live together. So what's the criteria that? But it's based on your agency as a human being, not on any theocratic idea about how you got here and what you owe allegiance to. And I would argue that outside of Jeremiah Wright and probably half a dozen others, you ain't got a Black theologian that could preach that sermon on no Sunday in the Black church. And we spend a lot of time in church, and that's why we end up being stuck with a lot of superstitious bullshit that don't work for us. And it really has nothing to do with understanding the more spiritual nature and dimension of the universe. So this is that getting rid of dogma and doctrine is not the same thing as abandoning theology and understanding that there's a spiritual dimension to the universe. And we just need more sophisticated, better thinking.
Right. And the court that's enacting this Supreme Court, has just overturned Roe v. Wade. Clarence Thomas, in his written opinion, laid out the rest of what they would be going after. Of course, again, one of the criminal things about that court is that it represents a minority view. Most people don't want what they're pushing.
But really, it represents a historical view. I mean,
it represents a historical view, but I'm saying currently in this country, the majority of folks are against what they're doing.
Yeah, but I'm saying
not only that, they were put in by presidents that never received a popular vote. Never.
But go ahead, Mike. Finish your point.
But Rick, I'm saying part of how we ought to be educating people, an argument we ought to be making, is that Clarence Thomas, Alito, et al., evangelical white Christian nationalists, want to return to the Middle Ages. They don't want to return to the middle of the last, and they want to return to the Middle Ages.
Okay.
Before Newton and Galileo discovered the universe and Newton's theory of gravity, that's where they want to go back to. They are against the notion of progress, the evolution. The one thing that we know is that the universe has evolved.
Yeah.
They want to live they want to believe that the universe was created and it's static and it never changed. And any changes mean you're violating some scriptural inspired notion of reality. as opposed to Newton and Einstein saying, well, looks like the way the universe works. We got some theory. I will give you the best argument for belief in an afterlife and spirit is not what you will find in any religious text. It's the first law of thermonuclear dynamics. And that is energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be transferred. So that literally means all the energy that's in the universe never goes away. It transfers to different forms. So the life forces, the energy that represent us today, when this dissipates in this form, we'll have to go someplace else and rejoin the universe. So I could give you, I could create a whole science-based theology that would be much more rational justification. It's why in the Enlightenment, people like Jefferson and Washington and Montesquieu and Rousseau and them became deists. They said, because you can reason to the notion of God. Now, once you start talking about what he did or what he does, you're making some stuff up now. But it is, if you look at the universe and the order of it, it's not rational to believe that this is an accident. Now, if you want to say, and here's what it means, what Locke would tell you in theory of human understanding is you can't know what you can't experience.
Mhm.
And if you're finite, you cannot experience the infinite. It ain't possible. So that means you can't know it. Now you can believe it, and literally faith is the answer to doubt. So when you hear people say, I have no doubt, that means you have no faith, because faith is the answer to I don't know. Okay, this is what I gotta believe, and I'll step out on it, but I can't know it. If you need, you need proof, it's why he said to Peter in the garden, "Who do men say that I am?" Okay, because they can't know who I am, but who do they say that I am? Them ain't accidental words. That sentence has some meaning. Okay, who do they say that I am?
Yeah.
And that's what, now we can have a discussion. But what we're doing is we're talking about what we believe, not what we know. Because you can't know.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Who do they say Joe Biden is? Joe Biden gave us Clarence Thomas, and now Joe Biden done cut a deal that he is going to nominate this cat, Chad Meredith,
In
to
Kentucky.
the federal bench,
In
who
Kentucky.
is a pro-lifer. This is who Joe Biden is. Who do they say he is?
Charles, I wrote a column about 3 years ago, a year before the election, when the primaries were going on. I said there's two, or right after he got the nomination, I said there's two bad things that can happen in 2020. The first bad thing, probably the worst, is Donald Trump could get reelected. The second bad thing is Joe Biden could get reelected. and I did another little column explaining the brothers in the barbershop about why they ought to support Biden. You should vote for Biden. He said, you ought to be mad. You're supposed to be mad. But if Trump wins, your bad will get worse. If Biden wins, your bad won't get better. Okay, that fundamental, and we got to quit selling Black people this false hope of what America is. That, you know, if I was Barack Obama, I believe like Obama was Obama too. If I went to Columbia and Harvard, and my daddy was from Africa and my mama was white, and I was raised by my grandmama who loved me in Hawaii, you know what? You can say I'll be everything they say about America too, but I didn't. That ain't my story. That ain't my journey. So Barack Obama's America but we are so captivated by charisma, and we deal with emotion and not reason. And reason ultimately, unfortunately, in humans, reason becomes a slave of emotion, as opposed to reason being able to discipline emotion. And literally, all of our problems are a function of our inability to rationally think about our existence and who we are and what it is mean, and then follow the facts where they may lead us, whether you wanted to go down that road or not. We'd rather make up a story that makes us feel better.
Yeah. And on that note, Mike Jones, I believe you have wrapped us up, man. And Larry Fields, Dr. Charles Alexander, thank you as always for your discussion and your insights. We gotta put this out in front of the people, man, so that people know and understand where we are. This is the level set and where we are, and where we need to go, and what we need to do. We'll see everybody next week. Come on back. Thank you for joining us.
Let me say this before we break out. Tomorrow, Corey Bush is having a gathering out at Fairground Park. I believe the time is 11 o'clock. All that are available that want to learn about her stance and what she's about, I think that'll be a good venue for you.
All right.
Now, Larry, that's why I had to stop. No, okay, Larry, I was gonna say that's kind of why I ended up stopping writing, because I didn't know where to, I knew where we was, but I didn't know where else to go. And more importantly, I didn't really know how to go there in 800 words once a week. Okay.
Yeah.